Now let's set aside the materials that we'll be saving for class, all of our different yarns, our wood dowel, and our roving. We just need our loom, our warp string, and our scrap yarn. And I'm going to bring a sample over so we can see where we are headed. This right here is where we are headed. We need our loom to be looking like this before we start class. And again, we have our warp string, our scrap yarn, our cardboard that we cut, our 2 3/4 by 7 inch, and a tapestry needle. When we get started, we are going to be doing these are our warp strings that are going up and down. We are going to be doing those first. That is this right here, and I'm just going to keep it on the spool, but I'm going to make sure that I have a good amount pulled off, and then we'll just see how it goes. So that's going to be over here. We've got some of the length pulled, and what we want to do is we want to tie it on at the bottom, and I'm going to do my second peg in. When we do our workshop, we do a shortened amount of pegs. That way we are able to complete our piece in class, and we are able to fit with our lovely little wood dowels. So for class, we are going to start on this second peg in, and I'm just taking my yarn around it and just tying a double knot. So you can see there's one knot, and I'm going to tie it pretty tight to that peg, and then my second knot. When we are warping our loom, we are just going up and down around our pegs, and we want to be going around, how many is that? 10 of them at the top? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All of these in the middle. And when you are going up and down, we are working with, this is our size 10 crochet cotton string. We want something very, we use cotton and something thin because we can pull on it and it's not going to break, and it's going to be really thin so it disappears in our weaving. Now I am going to keep tension. I'm pulling it pretty tightly, and I am going to never let it go. I'm going to keep pulling as I go up and down around all of these pegs. And you can kind of hear like those guitar strings, right? You want to make sure that it is tight and you are getting those, you want to say, pinging sounds. Now, if you need to kind of loosen it up and get more of your thread undone, just make sure that when you pick back up, you can see I kind of have my finger on it so it didn't really lose all of that tension. So you just want to make sure that you pull it again and you keep all of that good tension as we're going the whole way. We're pulling around each of them, being careful. And I'm demonstrating this on a tabletop, which isn't the most natural way. So if this is in your lap, however works and feels good for you. Now when I come down to this bottom peg, I'm going to move this up so you can see I'm coming on the inside, but I'm going to do a full wrap. And for me, that just helps me hold the tension and not lose all of this good tension that we have while I trim this and then tie it. So what I mean by trim it, again, I'm putting my finger on here so I don't lose any of that tension. I'm going to be grabbing my scissors and giving myself a good tail to work with. But we do want it to be shorter so that we're not dealing with all of this. So I have this, remember I wrapped it here, and it's helping me hold that good tension that we have across all of our strings. And I'm going to take this, again, with this finger, I'm holding this tension, I'm holding that so that it doesn't unwrap. And I'm going to be taking my end. We're just going to be working on this last warp string. So I'm taking my end over the top of it, and then I'm going to tuck it underneath and back up through this kind of hole or this U shape that we've done. So once I pull that back through, I'm going to pull it all the way down, and I'm going to pull it pretty tight. And then I'm going to do that one more time. And that's going to be our knot at the bottom. So again, I'm taking my end, I'm crossing it over the top of this last warp string. I'm tucking it underneath and up through here, and then I'm pulling it down, and that's going to be like our double knot. And the major thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we start and stop on the bottom of our loom. And that way, when we go to finish our piece, we have all of these nice loops at the top that we are going to be able to use and just put our wood dowel through, so then we don't have to be doing any extra tying off and tucking in. Now the other thing we want to do is we want to tuck in our spacer. We're going to weave in our spacer. This helps us have space at the bottom of our warp string so that we can tie them off when we are done weaving. And then we want to do our foundation rows of weaving so that in class we can just go ahead and start with our fringe on top of this. So what this looks like, I like to take my spacer, again, that is a 2 3/4 by 7, just piece of cardboard, scrap. You can cut it from a cereal box or a cardboard box. And I'm going to start underneath this first string, and it's just weaving in, so we're going to go under, over the entire way across. And once we get it all the way through, we're just going to be pushing it all the way down to the bottom. And again, this just gives us some good space at the bottom. It helps give us more of a proportional weave in the size that we want to be working on, and gives us space here to be able to tie these ends together once we are done weaving. Once that's in, we are going to be taking our scrap yarn and we are going to be weaving our foundation stitches. Now you just have enough to do 5 or 6 rows, so I'm just going to go ahead and take all of this off of this spool. Take all of that yarn off, and then I'm going to get my large eye needle. I'm going to be threading my needle and pulling a good amount through so that we have a shorter and a longer tail. So this longer tail is going to be what's in our weave, and the shorter tail we will continue shortening as we use up our yarn length. So if you've taken the workshop before, you know that, how to do our tabby weave. We are going to start on the left side here, and we're going to start over top. We're going to be starting the opposite of the way that the cardboard is woven in. So we are going to be going over top, underneath, over top, all the way across. And once we get all the way through, we are going to pull most of it through, but we want to make sure that we leave a tail. We don't want to pull all of our yarn through. And you see how I'm starting in the middle by pushing it down and then pushing it down this direction. Because this is the foundation, we want to be really careful that we're not pulling anything too tight, because if we pull too tight in this stage, then we are already going to be pushing our warp strings in, and we definitely do not want that. I'm going back the other way, starting over top, underneath, all the way back. And we're going to make sure that this tail comes all the way through, and we just have our yarn inside, our single strand of yarn. And I'm going to pull this needle and shorten that tail so that it doesn't get stuck in there, and go back the other way. I'm going to make sure that I have 5 rows. That to me feels like a good number. If you are working with scrap yarn at home, it can be any color. If you know the color fringe you're doing, you could match it to your fringe. That could kind of extra hide it. But really this is going to be underneath that fringe, so we aren't worrying too much about it. We just want to make sure we have a good foundation so that fringe can sit on top of something, so that when we finish our weave and we are tying our warp strings together, they're tying up to the edge of this yarn here and not tying up to our fringe, which wouldn't be as straight and sturdy of a foundation to tie our weave off on. Now I'm just completing my 5th row. This is going to be my final row. And we want to remember how to tuck our ends in. We want to make sure that these disappear and are secure. So I don't need all of this extra length. I'm going to be shortening that. So I'm going to bring my needle down close to my weave and trim it off. This is going to be extra. And remember, when the yarn is coming underneath the last warp string, we want to fill it in. So we want a little loop of yarn on this last warp string. Since it's coming underneath, the way we do that is we go in between the last two warp strings and we take our needle down. Now, when we pull that through, you can see that creates a little loop of yarn and that fills in that gap. I'm going to turn my loom over, so then we are tucking in this string end on the back of our loom, and we are going to be going to the second warp string over and underneath both of those loops. Now, because there's only 2 loops and I am able to kind of keep tucking this in, I'm going to go back up this third one in. There's 3 here. I'm just going to go back up 2 of them, and that just makes me feel double secure that our foundation is all tucked in. Once we have it through those 2 loops on this string, 2 loops on this string, I'm just going to be trimming off and leaving just a little tail. Now we have to go back and we have to tuck in this original tail. So this tail here, we want to make sure that that gets tucked in. And because this one here is coming over top of this warp string, we can take our needle just in between our loom and our first warp string. I'm going to just place it down through there. And you can see when that string goes to the back, it's covering up this warp thread. So that's what we want. When I turn it over, I'm going to make sure that we go to the second warp string in and we go up. I'm going to go up just 2. And then just like we did in the last one, I'm going to go ahead and just go down the next 2. So this is going to be 2 loops on our third warp string in. And that just again feels like our foundation is double secure with our tucking in. I'm going to trim that. And we are ready for class. Looking good.